The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to give a little bit of additional time here before we get right to it to begin, as people are shuffling in. So we'll be starting in just about another minute or two. Hello. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar in our series, Going Back to School Before the Kids. This is the second webinar of this series and our sixth webinar overall in Transfinder's presentations in partnership with the NAPT. We're very glad that you can join us today. My name is Andrew Hamilton. I'm the Senior Application Specialist with Transfinder Corporation. And I want to welcome you to today's webinar, and I want to provide you with a couple of friendly reminders that this is an interactive webinar with a questions panel at the end. As this webinar proceeds and as we get to the discussion panel portion, you can use the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel to communicate any questions or concerns that you have. Now, you'll be able to hear us, but we're not going to be able to hear you, so please do use that question section to communicate with us here. Now, as for what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be looking at moving forward with working with our operations prior to the students joining up with us. We're going to be joined by several industry experts giving a presentation, Tim Ammon and Tom Platt. So with that out of the way at that point, we'll then be moving on to our panel discussion, which will allow you to ask any questions and share any concerns that you have, of course. And with that, I'd like to turn over the presentation to the CEO of Transfinder, Antonio Civitella, who'd like to share a few words.
All right. Hello, everybody, and good morning and good afternoon, based on the time zone. Here we are. And thank you, Andy, and we're looking forward to today's webinar. We have a lot of great speakers here. We have a lot of, and by the way, we're going to probably have another record-breaking attendees. We're close to 470 some people have attended this webinar, and the number just keeps going up. Maybe we could break the 500 mark today. But welcome again to this is our second part of the going back to school before the kids get back to school. So now for about a month, we've been focusing on the operations and how we've been servicing the industry and the community, but in an operation wise. But now we're thinking, well, what happens in the future? How does this, if there's going to be summer school, how does that going to look? What about the fall opening? How will that look? So a lot of good things are actually on its way right now. So cool things. And in addition, with this right here, we want to make sure that we continue our webinars. I feel like hopefully you guys could hear my audio. I'm hearing a lot of things going back and forth. It's our 6th webinar, which is exciting with the NAPT. So thank you. The feedback's been tremendous. We're going to continue helping NAPT. Really, it's an awesome partnership. And again, I want to keep praising all the leaders in the school industry, and really how it's been, all the regional people, and then really nationally, that everyone's stepping up and really are forward thinking about how to solve some of these issues that no one asked for. Nobody asked for this dilemma to happen, but we're all stepping up to the plate. Got to thank NAPT for the way you've really been leading this industry, and really during this crisis, people are turning to organizations like NAPT to get answers. And it's really important to know that there's people out there that want to help, and I know you're part of that. And I gotta keep saying how I'm so proud personally to be part of this industry. The school transportation community is so strong, and it's so nice to feel that. So again, I don't want to talk too much. We have so many great things about the experts are going to be talking about what's coming next. And again, Mike Martin, thank you again, the executive director of NAPT. I want to thank you again for giving us the opportunity. I'm going to be checking out the questions, so please get these questions going, because I might pop in toward the end, ask some questions. If maybe I have my own questions to ask, or of course I'll help you guys gather. We're going to get we're at 491, so we're close to get 500. To get that many people, we're going to probably have a lot of questions. So please send us questions. And now from sunny and warm Albany, New York, Mike Martin. Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you, Antonio. And good afternoon, everyone. I know you have a lot of education options these days, a lot of webinar options, so we're honored that you've chosen to join us today. Thank you. According to Education Week, 43 states and Washington, D.C. have ordered or recommended school buildings to remain closed for the remainder of the current school year, affecting over 45 million students. Schools in coronavirus hotspots like New York, New Jersey, and California may not even be able to open for a fall deadline. As a consequence, for states to relax restrictions, the federal guidelines call for a 14-day downward trajectory of COVID-19 cases. And that doesn't mean you can go 13 straight days at the same level and the final one drop down. That's not a downward trend. What it does mean is that you can go 13 days at this level and go up one day, and you have to start all over again. So that has created a variety of challenges for school leaders across the country. The second challenge I think that we face at the federal level right now is that the second part of the current three-phase plan for restarting the economy calls for reopening schools while also barring groups gathering of 50 or more. And that's sort of confusing. It's kind of perplexing to me, especially. I'm not sure really how you're supposed to open schools, but not let more than 50 people get together in any one location. There's a host of inherent challenges there. So as I was thinking about some of these, I reached out to my good friends, Tim Ammon and Tom Platt, who are the co-owners of the Decision Support Group and are longtime consultants to the industry. Frankly, I consult with them myself from time to time because I love the way they think and I love the way they look at things. They as my father used to say, oftentimes they stand on their head when they're trying to analyze a problem, and it's really helpful sometimes. They're very analytical and they take a long view of things, but in every conversation, they give me some type of actionable advice, something that's really practical as a takeaway. So before this conversation ended, I said to them, hey guys, would you be willing to turn this conversation into a webinar for me? And they said, fortunately, yes. And as a consequence, here we are. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Tim Ammon and Tom Platt from the Decision Support Group.
Very good. Mike, thank you very much to the folks at Transfinder and to all of you who are here today. Thank you all very much. Tom and I are both honored and really pleased to be here to be able to present what is an abbreviated version of a presentation we had delivered last week for the NAPT members that is focused on the idea of trying to get our houses in order in terms of preparing for the start of school. And so what we want to be able to talk about is just some thoughts that we've had related to those preparations and the things that transportation managers are going to be confronted by as we are apparently, if you're in the state of Montana and Wyoming, potentially opening on May 7th, but we'll see how that goes. So our focus today is going to really be on three things. The first thing is on, what are we facing? And ultimately, that's really the challenge of being a person and the challenge of being in an organization in the context of both this virus and the economic problems that states and that school districts are going to be confronting, because while the two are related, their implications are likely to be intersecting but not laying on top of each other. I think obviously the next thing we want to talk about is what is it that you can really do? How do you make productive progress towards a school reopening? What are the resources that you can use? Who can you reach out to? What's available to you as leaders in the transportation industry, but more importantly, as leaders in the pursuit of normalcy for millions of families across the country. And then lastly, just some thoughts on decision making. What do we want to do to be able to position organizations to respond well, not only to these two events, but to events in the future? What these crises have given us is an opportunity to rethink the way that we've designed organizations and to rethink the way that we approach challenges and to try to use that to make us better in the future. And then hopefully what we'll end up with is a bunch of questions from you all for us to be able to all collectively learn from. Right, so we're huge believers in the idea that the first thing we really need to do is to be honest with ourselves. Right? We're all seeking some level of normalcy here. And in most instances, we're looking to be right about the predictions we make. And I think both of those things are likely to be in short supply in the near term. As a result, what we want to do as individuals and what we want to do as leaders of organizations is to try to point ourselves in the direction where we can make reasoned and hopefully correct decisions. But the reasoned part of this is a major element in where we're trying to position organizations. Because there are certain things that we just have to acknowledge. I think first and foremost is that this isn't anything that's happened before. After 9/11, after the 2008-2009 recession, we didn't close 80% of the schools in the country. So this isn't going to be a normal response, and it's not going to be normal for operations anywhere. And so if what we have is a truly novel event, we've got to start to come up with some strategies that are novel to the way that we operate, right? So what we'll be thinking about is, what is it that has to happen on a temporary basis? What is it that has to happen on a semi-permanent basis? And then what are the ultimate permanent changes that we might make to the way that our departments and our organizations operate? Because the biggest challenge that we're likely to face is frankly us. Right? Individuals, people make a tremendous number of systemic errors in the way that they think. And it's identifying and getting comfortable with those systemic errors on the front end of things that we think is an important element in designing and establishing a decision-making process in your organization that's going to give you the chance to succeed. There's two that we're primarily interested in, and that's the second one, which is the representative bias. We've heard a lot of talk about how this is an economic collapse, just like 08-09. Everybody's talking about this like it's the Spanish flu. I don't think anybody here was a director at the time of the Spanish flu, but if we were, what we would say is, this is what we did the last time, so we're going to do that now. We implore you, don't do that, right? Because what we know is the third thing is that everybody's chasing some kind of normalcy. And for now, because of all the uncertainties, we're not going to have that. And we just need to acknowledge it. And we need to put our organizations and ourselves in a mental position to say, there is a ton of stuff we're not going to know. There's a ton of stuff that we want to know and aren't ever going to figure out. But we've got to move forward regardless of that. So how do we structure ourselves to maximize our ability to do the right thing at the right time under those conditions? So what does that mean? Ultimately, I think what it means is, even though we may not know a lot, we actually do have a lot of things that we know. And those two things seem counter to each other, but they're really not. You may not know anything about how your district is going to open in the fall, but you have some sense of what the resources are that are available to you, who the people are that you have available to you, what you can do with those folks. And it's our take that those are the things that we need to build out from, and to be able to provide leadership at our individual districts and frankly, leadership nationally with an understanding of here are the things that we can do. And as we have talked about before, be an advocate for the consequences of saying, if you do this, then this is something that we can expect, right? Because what we want to try to create is organizations that are flexible in the way that they're implementing things, but structured in the way that they're going about making decisions, that are focused on the activities of today, but that are looking out to what's going to happen a month from now. And that are conservative in the way that they're making projections because of all the uncertainty that exists, but they're progressive in the way that they're thinking about the options available to them. So when we think about our organization, the key thing is how do we translate those ideas into actual actions? And that's what Tom's going to focus on.
Thanks, Tim. So let's get on with it, right? That's the title of this first slide. And let me start by offering my own thanks for everybody taking time out of their day to join us. And to emphasize again what Tim said, which is that we're trying to move through this in a fairly abbreviated fashion to make sure that we leave plenty of time to address your questions and to have our discussion at the end. We will absolutely make this content available to anybody who is looking for it. So feel free to reach out. We will make that available to you after the webinar is done. So I will try and cover this fairly quickly and by emphasizing some key points on each slide as we move through. What I want to begin with is this notion that this world that we all work in, the student transportation world, we tend to be at the end of a decision chain within our districts. We tend to, as a result, have a bias toward being reactive to situations rather than being out in front of them. And that's something that we want to really focus on changing your mindset about. This is new. This is different. This is unlike anything we have faced before. And as a result, as leaders within our industry, it's incumbent on us to get out in front of it and to be part of the decision-making process, not just reactive to it. In that sense, this notion of what if, and most of what we're talking about is in regards to the what ifs. What if becomes what now? Always. Every time, just not all the time. And the keys to getting out in front of all of the what ifs, there's really three words I want to leave you with. Thought, connection, collaboration. It's incumbent on each of you to be thoughtful about your what ifs, not your neighbors, but your own, to connect with your peers and the resources that are available to you, and to collaborate on determining what your approach and what your answers are going to be. Not every eventuality will come to pass. We've given you a list of things that pop to our mind. I'm sure that all of you are thinking about numerous other possibilities that might come to pass. The key is to identify all of them, plan for all of them, but emphasize the ones that are most likely for you in your particular situation. Tim, if you would. The key here, one of them, is the connection part, staying engaged. What we mean by that is you're on an island. Each of us as leaders within this industry are faced with our own situation and our own demands. But just because you're on an island does not mean you're alone. You have plenty of resources available to you. There are avenues available to you. but it is up to you to go out there and grab them. It's up to you to go out there and access them. Understanding that your situation may be unique, but the resources that are available to you out there are people who are struggling with the same environment that you're struggling with. NAPT, our host today, is key among those, your neighbors and your peers. But what we really want you to take away from this slide is understanding that you have an enormous amount of value inside your own district and specifically with your own staff. Tim, if you would. And we're emphasizing that you need to utilize those resources to help you respond to this new and uncertain world that we're all faced with. Here's some steps that we think you ought to be taking in terms of how you address your specific what ifs. The key takeaway from this slide is action is up to you. Nobody else, just you. So Tim, if you would. So what resources, you may ask, are we really talking about here? Well, going back to this notion of your own staff as your best and most available resource. What are they doing today now that the buses are not running? What expertise do they have? I think you would surprise yourself at how much your staff knows. And so much of what we are talking about here is being able to access those resources that are available to you and doing so in creative and new ways. One of the things that Tim and I talk about and have been talking about for many years now is that in our particular business, time is a perishable resource. All we have to offer to our clients is our time. If I decide to get up from my chair and go around the corner into my living room and watch the next episode of Ozark, that hour I never get back. That's an hour that I could have used productively to be thinking about the future and acting and preparing for the future. So I'll challenge you with this. What is your staff doing now? What are they available to do to help you manage the future? Outside of your own staff, there's numerous other resources inside of your district. It's the experience and the expertise that's contained within your own district that you can organize and you can put to work in helping get you ready for the future. How do you do that? Teams we talk about. What exactly are we talking about here? We're talking about gaining focus on the uncertainty. We talked about the what ifs and planning for the what ifs. Teams, in our view, using teams effectively is the best, most effective way of getting your arms around everything that's going on these days. It will help you gain focus by defining a scope and objectives and assigning a team to each and every one of those what ifs that you have defined for yourself. It's also our notion that your people will surprise you. Once they understand that they are not alone, and most importantly, once they understand that what we're facing today is not a matter of going out and making the donuts, right? Your drivers are not going out and operating the same routes every day that they were doing for all of those weeks and months leading up to this crisis. Once they understand that they have value, that their ideas and their expertise matters, and putting their specific expertise and experience together with somebody else with a different perspective and a different skill set can be a real force multiplier in terms of addressing and getting ready for all of those what ifs, so that when they do become what now, you're ready for it. Tim? This is just a simple example of how you can organize yourself to help you organize the team. Ultimately, the message here is it's not going to just happen. It's going to take you and your leadership to get out in front of how you're going to utilize these teams and how you're going to put them to work. If you would, Tim. And what we want to emphasize as we bring this to conclusion is an approach to addressing the what if is the same thing as developing a plan. You won't have the answers. The point of the team-based approach and defining your what ifs and defining your approach to how you will get to the answers is the same as developing a plan. The best plans in the world start changing as soon as you start implementing them, but it's not an excuse to avoid the planning in the first place. Okay. Another example of how once the team is formulated, defining the issues and putting them to work to solve a specific problem is what this is all about. And if you would, Tim. So as I leave you, what I want to emphasize here is a theme that you will hear in our panel discussion that follows and in Tim's closing remarks. Remind yourself, you're going to be wrong. In fact, you might be wrong a lot. So what is what we say to that? Everybody is wrong, and failure breeds success ultimately. Keep going. You won't be wrong all the time. And the exercise of focusing yourself on your what ifs and the problem solving will yield massive benefits to you, your people, and your organization, because it'll teach them the skills they need to be right the next time. With that, I'll give it back to Tim for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Tom. And I think what's important to remember is failure, as we talked about the last time we did this, is an option, and it will happen. But that is primarily because so much uncertainty remains out there. And what we need to be able to do is to design a decision process that allows us to trap the uncertainty, to trap the failures, and to learn from them to be able to respond better the next time, right? What we really want to be able to create is an organization that is learning all the time, not only from external sources about what's being provided and expected, but from its own internal processes, where it said, we tried this and it didn't work, so we stopped and we tried this. And that level of experimentation and that learning from the experimentation, we think is going to be the hallmark of success in starting what will be a very uncertain school start in the 2020-21 school year. It's our take that that's going to require us to rethink the way transportation departments instinctually respond to crises. Typically, the crises is responded to with efficiency, especially when they're budget related. We'll just get more efficient. We'll take buses out of the fleet. We'll take drivers out of the fleet. We'll save money. Everybody will leave us alone. We don't think that's true this time. What we're arguing for is trying to create a process that allows your organization to be three things. That allows it to be flexible, that allows it to be resilient, and that allows it to be responsible. In terms of flexibility, what we're suggesting is that means you're going to have to break the paradigm of this is the way we do it around here. Because the way you did it around here now is probably not going to work tomorrow. So figuring out different ways to do work that may have the same goal, but have a different method, we think is critical for leadership in the immediate term. Resiliency in our minds is the idea of identifying your what ifs. Plan for, think about where the risks are and the threats are in your organization, build plans to respond to them, and then design a process that says, did this work, right? If we get knocked to the mat because we made a mistake, how do we get back up and how do we fix what's broken? That's the level of resiliency that we're looking for in trying to create in organizations. And then lastly is the responsiveness piece. We are on the dirty end of the stick a lot. I get it. And we hear it every time we talk to somebody. But what we want to try to do is to change the mindset, because we are first to the fight here for this, that we are bringing the educational leadership ideas about how we can get the kids back in school and create that level of normalcy by saying, this isn't the way we've always done it, but here's the way we can do it. Because it is our responsibility to be a productive and effective part of that reopening process. because nobody is going to be relied on more. As we have frequently talked about, there's no service in the school district that shows up at your house twice a day other than transportation. So let's go out there and try to be part of that process that ends up bringing that level of normalcy back to households, and probably for all the parents in the room where they'll just be as grateful to get the kids the hell out of the house for a while, right? And when we're thinking about it, ultimately what we think of is there are 5 things that you're going to have to do to accomplish this, right? It's going to be a massive challenge. It's going to be incredibly systemic in that it's going to touch everything that happens in our world. It's going to affect the OEMs. It's going to affect parts suppliers. It's going to affect your ability to get drivers. It's going to affect the technology firms, everybody. So what do we do? How do we get ourselves personally and organizationally ready to meet this challenge? We think the first thing that everybody has to do is just get comfortable with the uncertainty. You can ask for answers all you want, but they're just not going to be there for a while. So if what we don't know is what's going to happen, we've got to put ourselves in a position to respond to multiple things and then pick the best plan that we have going forward. Next, I think we just need to understand that the way we've done business forever isn't the way we're probably going to be doing business tomorrow. Everybody's talked about the social distancing and all those kind of other things, but I think there are other more fundamental problems than that are going to have to get addressed. And it's here where we as leaders in the organization need to start thinking about different ways of doing business. The third thing we need to do is to appreciate that we've got a ton of leverage in our organization. We've got expertise and we've got experience in ways that go beyond just driving buses and taking care of them. You know about your people and you know what their backgrounds are, and you have an opportunity to leverage those backgrounds to a great degree to come up with options to respond to the uncertainty. And then think about organizations like NAPT. Think about the people who you're on this webinar with. Think about where your peers and your partners are, whether they're your vendor partners or other third-party organizations, where you can say to them, here's what I'm thinking. Is this crazy or could this work? Or you can be the one who's offering up, here's what we're doing. And it's either working or it didn't. Again, don't be afraid to admit the failure. Don't be afraid, in our mind, to be wrong the right way. And then the last thing that I think we need to do is to just accept that some stuff is going to go wrong. That sometimes you just get unlucky, right? Sometimes bad things happen even if you've got the best plan. The critical thing to do is to design your organization to be resilient to those challenges, to get up off the mat and to be able to respond in a way that makes you the productive participant in the organization that transportation has always been. So with that, certainly I want to be able to turn it back over to Mike and to Rick so that we can start to address questions from the audience, questions from Mike and Rick, and hear about what's happening in the real world out there.
Thank you so much. So for starters, let everybody know who I am in case they're wondering who's that strange guy there. My name is Rick DeRico. I'm the Director of Public Relations at Transfinder. And I just got to say, first of all, Tim and Tom, just looking at the feedback already on our question board here, it's been tremendous. So there's a lot of people who want copies of your slides even to give to their superintendent. So just you hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of people, you address a lot of the questions and concerns people are having. And I should let people know that we have a best practices page. It's found off of Transfinder's homepage or transfinder.com. And then you just scroll along and you'll see right there on the homepage our best practices page. And this presentation will be on it. A couple of things I wanted to start off with real quickly. And Mike Martin, of course, is back with us, the Executive Director at NAPT. I'm sorry, Mike. Were you going to say something, Mike?
I had a couple of questions that I wanted to ask myself before we went out to the larger community of people.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. One quick question first, and then I'll go to you. Just you talk about being able to be wrong, and it's okay to be wrong. That takes a special kind of boss. I got to say, when I was hired, my boss Tony Cerdanel said, "You're going to make mistakes, and you just kind of hope it's not like, fatal mistake." So, does there have to be some conversations that are happening within your departments to kind of set the table for that kind of environment where you can feel free to say, hey, you're going to aim high and you're probably going to miss on some of these things. How do we learn from those things, adjust from those things? Talk about being flexible, resilient, and responsible. So something have to happen first before you can feel that comfort to be able to be wrong? Tim or Tom?
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, so I think absolutely, right? One of the things that we have tried to convey throughout all of these things is that everybody needs to appreciate the uncertainty.
Right.
Everybody needs to be able to appreciate that we are going to be wrong, and that may take you bringing that issue to the people you work for and saying, we just don't know some of the things that we need to know. So I'm going to build my plans based on the best information that I have, right? What we're not talking about is being indifferent to the answer, right? What we're talking about is being wrong in the context of we set a set of assumptions, we built a plan based on those, and some of the assumptions may have been wrong. So now we've got to go back and revisit those and try to design a new plan.
Well, like they say, like the first, they say like the battle, the best battle plan doesn't survive the first shot usually.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And what I would just quickly add to that is, today's environment is very different, right? It's one thing to be bold enough to be wrong in a steady state. It's very different to be bold in an age of uncertainty when there's any number of possible outcomes.
That's great. The other thing I wanted to say, and then on Mike, go ahead and jump in, is just when I took away from your presentation also is just how much you do have at your disposal already, how much control. You may not realize you have as much control as you do, and I think that there is some comfort in there. Were you surprised as you were even putting together some of this presentation? Did you learn something as you were putting this together?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. For sure, the whole notion behind this presentation was, we're not immune in our own little organization to the same things, right? To the same level of uncertainty. And it took several conversations and a fair amount of time for Tim and I to get together and say, you know what? We got to get out in front of this. We have to think about what this means for us. We need to think about what this means for the future of our industry. So that sort of recognition that it's very easy to fall into that zone where you just don't know what to do. So you get to this point of stasis and not doing anything. And that's what we're encouraging everybody to get out in front of, to take charge of their own destinies in terms of planning for the future.
I like that.
Yeah, and I would just suggest too that part of this is about having a reason to be thinking about the way that you're approaching this, right? There is an awful lot of times where we hear people say, transportation gets told last. And what we're arguing is cut the line, get up front. Cut the line and have people say, hey, this is what we can do. Here's how we can do it. How do you want to respond to that? Because it puts you in a much better position to be in control of your own destiny.
Make yourself part of the conversation.
I love that. Tom, you had said, action is up to you, which I just, there you go. Michael.
I'd like to drill down you guys for a minute, if you don't mind. I've got sort of one question with two parts, so maybe it's two questions, I don't know. But first one is, Tom, you mentioned, for example, leveraging the experience and expertise of your staff in terms of identifying the things that you have control over, and then you also talked about the importance of a team-based approach to solving, the challenges that are in front of everybody right now. So, if I'm one of the participants who's listening to this webinar, I'm wondering, for example, what's the first thing I do? How do I recommend? How would you recommend that people get started? And then, secondly, how do you actually leverage the experience that's out there among your staff and on your team?
Yeah, so it's yeah, thanks, Mike. It's those are part and parcel to the same thing, right? The reason the experience and the expertise is so important is because we know tomorrow is going to be different, but we don't know how, right? And essentially that means that it's an exercise in rebaselining. Where are we starting from? And that's when experience and expertise really shows itself in terms of the value. But we're all experts in something. We're not experts in everything. And that's where the team comes in. It's, you know, getting experts from various disciplines together on the same team to focus on a well-defined issue and to determine what your approach is going to be to get to answers on that issue allows that collaboration to happen, where the value of my expertise is added to the value of Mike's expertise and Rick's expertise, and the end result is a much greater than the sum of its parts. How do you get started? You have to take that first step. Acknowledge that you're scared. Acknowledge the uncertainty. That's what I was talking about in my earlier answer. That's what Tim and I had to do ultimately. We had to get past that first shock. And then we had to focus on what's the most likely, most important issue, the most important what if that might come to be. And that's your point of entry. Organize your first team around that specific issue. Show a little success in terms of the formation of that team, and then move on to the next.
Tim, you said a couple of things that caught my ear. First one was it's okay to be wrong the right way. Do me a favor, can you elaborate on it a little bit? What do you really mean by being wrong the right way?
Yeah, I think what we believe is, and certainly what I believe is, this being wrong the right way is about actually learning from your mistakes. It's about creating a process both individually and organizationally where the first thing you do is actually acknowledge that you may have failed, that it didn't work, right? That's an incredibly difficult thing for organizations. We see it all the time. It's, you know, it's the John Kennedy thing of, you know, success has 1,000 fathers and failure is an orphan, right? Because nobody really wants to own it. What we're suggesting is own the things that don't work, particularly own the things that didn't work in conditions of uncertainty, and then build a way to learn from them. Build an organization that says, this is how we got to the point that we got to before the failure. So where could we have intervened? Where could we have changed something that would have made that failure a success? And that, to our mind, is how you fail the right way.
The second thing that for Tim too that caught my ear as well was you mentioned that one of the things that we typically do as an industry or community of people is we kind of focus on efficiency, right? Our problem, we tend to think that our problems can be solved by being more efficient. And I know this is, you know, one of those things that you and I have in particular talked about numerously. So do me a favor, you know, you're not suggesting that people not as worry as much about being efficient as you are suggesting that they worry about it in a different way, right? I mean, would you do me a favor and kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. What we're really talking about is reordering the instincts that people have, right? The instinct here is almost always, we'll just make this cheaper and it'll be fine. And I don't think that that's correct this time. And what we're arguing under this idea of flexibility, responsiveness, and resiliency is that you can achieve efficiency that way. And you probably can achieve better efficiencies that way, but they're focused differently. Because one of the things that we've seen in organizations is that they have been magnificently effective at being efficient. They've designed incredibly tight systems. They've designed the system so tightly that if it rains, the whole system's shot because the timing is now the traffic is slower and everything else, right? So what we would argue is that level of focus on efficiency is unhelpful, and it's particularly unhelpful when things are uncertain. And if what we can think about is the way that we optimize, right? This optimization question is almost always one of we're trying to optimize for time, we're trying to optimize for distance, or we're trying to optimize for both. And the reason for that is because that's math, right? And you know, we didn't know that there was going to be math involved here, but the idea is what we want to do is rethink the way we approach optimization. What are we really trying to optimize for? And what does it do to us as an organization if frankly what we optimize for is flexibility, right? And so we're able to use vehicles twice a day. because we've got AM and PM sections, or we're able to use them 6 days in a row because we've got 18% of the kids going to school every day of the week, because that's what gives us the social distancing in the buildings, right? That's a fundamentally different kind of efficiency than just focusing on getting N to the smallest number possible. And that's certainly what we're arguing for.
I want to get into a couple of specifics, and then I want to let you know I have taken a bunch of questions here, so we'll probably have a rapid fire at the end where we'll have to go pick some shorter, pithy answers there. But you mentioned that, and I like this quote. You said you might be surprised about how much your staff knows, and I know you have gone into some detail there. But do you have any kind of like best practices of how to really tap into that that knowledge base? And that goes for you too, Mike. What's the best way to really get those ideas to bubble up? Because some people just want to keep their head below surface and I'll go about doing my job. You tell me what to do, and maybe they don't even think that their opinions matter or whatever. So how do you have some things that you've seen out there that really work to tap into those ideas?
You know, I think you just answered the question for yourself, Rick, right? I mean, it's about building an environment where it's okay to express your opinion. In fact, we want you to. An environment where it's okay to fail. It's okay to be wrong, to Tim's point, right? And then to start yourself as a leader. You have to begin with the belief in your own staff that they know a lot more than you perhaps give them credit for, because they've been so wrapped up and so nose to the grindstone every day, right? You know, if you might have that driver out there who could be running the world, but is comfortable just doing their job every day. You need to build an environment where it's comfortable for that person to come forward and be the contributor that they can be.
Right. I like what you just said also, that you have to be communicating that to them, just their value. Tim and Mike?
Well, I'll tell you one, just from my experience, Rick, one of the things that I think has been really valuable is people, people aren't always comfortable doing things like this on a webinar, in front of a group, in front of a camera, you know, so it's, and some of us aren't. So the easiest thing to do, frankly, is kind of figure out, you know, from your personal interaction with those folks, where they're the most comfortable having a conversation with you. From my standpoint, there's far more things that I do and a lot more conversations that I have that anyone ever knows about, because the people that I talk to are not comfortable knowing with other people knowing that they're talking to me about things, you know, and I think that's pretty common across the board. So once you kind of, you know, embrace that concept that you have to really customize your communication, you have to individualize your approach with everybody else. To me, that's how you build the team. If you watch, for example, the ESPN special that's on about the Chicago Bulls on right now, right? I mean, Dennis Rodman was a completely different animal than anybody else on that team, and he got treated like a completely different animal than anybody else on that team because he had value that he could bring to the whole. You know, it's that whole the whole concept of, you know, wherever it is, you know, this is not as strong as this, right? So if you can find a way to have those conversations in an environment where people are comfortable sharing with you genuinely what they know and what you think, you can take it back to the larger group. Don't make them feel like they have to be, you know, right on the front line with that.
Very good. I like that.
And the last thing I would add is just to appreciate some people's primary value might be just the connection between teams.
Right.
If we know individuals who happen to have good relationships with the mechanics and good relationships with the drivers, maybe that person is the connector of teams, and that's the value that they provide. They don't have to have a subject matter expertise. They just have to be who they are, and you just have to be able to recognize that and to see where the sinew gets connected between the teams in order to be able to give you as the leader a much bigger sense of what the picture is of the organization. And that's what those connectors can do.
The key to all this, it sounds like, both with what all three of you had said, is really knowing your team enough to know number one, how to communicate with them, how do they like, what format they like to communicate, and then even just recognizing their value. Not everybody is talks about their feelings or whatever, but they are connectors. They know how they're, they know how to get you in front of the right people, and they maybe also have just they're respected, and just by virtue of being connected with them, they have the support of their peers or whatever.
And just lastly, and this goes back to something that Tom said, and I don't want to lose this just because of the demographics of it. If you're a 10-bus school district in New Jersey and you're by yourself in an office trying to figure this out, this is your team. Right? Reach out to your peers, reach out to your partners, reach out to your vendors. That's your team. Go to them. They can help you. God, they desperately want to help you. So just because you are alone, you're not alone. You still got a team.
That's great. And one of the things we've been saying at Transfinder a lot is this: when you can't over communicate. In times like this, if you let too much time go, people's minds can start to wander. In terms of, are we, just sometimes they go right to the worst case scenarios. So you can't over communicate where things are at. Okay, I got a couple of rapid fire questions, and so I'll just jump right in if that's okay. Mark is looking for some specifics on putting kids on buses in this environment. He said he's seen a lot of webinars, but hasn't seen anything really specifically on that. School, I guess Katrina mentioned that some districts are opening as early as May 7th. And so she wants to know also, like, what changes are going to need to be made on the transportation side of things. So kind of two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, I think we have no idea, to be perfectly honest. I think that's the problem with a lot of this, is that the idea of how you can get kids on buses is going to be incredibly dependent on the constraints that get put on you, right? I mean, if we have to social distance and we're putting 12 kids on a bus, that's a fundamentally different thing than if what we're doing is, recognizing. So there was a study out of England this morning, right, that talked about how younger kids don't seem to be as susceptible to the virus as older kids even, right? So maybe at the elementary level, we can get 30 kids on, and at the high school level, we can get 12. But those are the things that have to get decided first, because nobody knows. And it's not because we don't have an answer. It's because there isn't an answer yet. And I think that's what people have to push on.
Hey, Rick, if I may, let me try to address that from maybe, again, standing on my head, right? I think the answer to that question is have a conversation among your staff, with your peers, pull in people either at your local and or state level who are experts in health and health related issues, and then make a recommendation, come to a decision yourself and say, look, I think I can comfortably put 12 people on this bus and make sure I maintain social distancing and or related rules. Then take that to the next level. Go to the people who are going to be making decisions in the larger scheme with you and say, this is what I think we can do. I don't think we can do 30 kids on a bus. I think we can do 12.
Yeah,
so
and jumping off of
you create the plan and then let them kind of push back on that, as opposed to waiting for a plan to come to you.
Absolutely.
Exactly. It's the fundamental difference between being reactive and being out in front of the problems, right? To Tim's point, we don't have the answers. We don't. To Mike's point, you guys, everybody out there listening in today, you're the experts. You're not an expert in everything, but you're an expert in marshaling the resources and the expertise necessary to make a recommendation. It may not be the right recommendation. It may in fact be wrong, but at least it's a recommendation and you're controlling your own fate, not waiting for the dictate to come down.
And I would suggest as a final point, Rick, too, that erring on the side of being conservative is not going to hurt you here, right? If you go out and say, I think I can comfortably put 12 students, regardless of size or grade, on a school bus, versus saying I think I can do 24 or 25. I think personally, I think you're going to be better off making the more conservative recommendation.
I think people have gotten very used to the expression. We kind of joked about it a little bit, but like out of an abundance of caution, right? That's the catchphrase these days. No one's going to argue with you. Better safe than sorry. Al's asking, he's just saying, it's not really a question, but he says, and by the way, I should also mention, one other person mentioned, like, Tim and Tom, you guys have completely reaffirmed Thomas's way of thinking. So I just want to let you know that I think you kind of helping people to feel comfortable with the way that they've already been moving forward. Al's asking about, just talking about how like all plans are centered on social distancing, and operationally we need to redesign, and do you agree with this? We need to redesign our daily interactions with employees from the social distancing perspective, among other things that we have to reimagine. Is that kind of like, is that a new normal forever, or is that a normal for a temporary new normal? What do you think?
You know, again, I applaud the notion, right, that that's one amongst many things that we need to be figuring out, right? But to believe that this is a highly temporary situation and that everything will go back to normal in the fall is precisely the kind of thinking that we're trying to undermine with this presentation. So to be thinking about those things as long-term issues is exactly correct from our perspective.
Sorry, Tim.
Well, I was going to say, and I think it's the same as everybody else. Until there's a vaccine, right, or until there's some definition that says this is how we can interact closely again, it is that issue that we are going to have to, and this is why it's a systemic problem. It will affect everything in the way that your organization operates. Two people standing next to each other at the fuel pump is probably not going to be okay for a while, and it happens every day. So it's a procedural issue, and it's an enforcement mechanism issue in terms of how we're going to deal with that.
And I think, Rick, I think the analogy I would offer here to address that is that, you know, in the wake of September the 11th, right, we all had to take our shoes off and remove our belts for years, right? And it was only after a significant amount of time that they decided a certain few of us then could go through and leave our shoes on and our belts on, right? So and there's a lot of people these days who don't remember what it was like to travel the old way. I mean, and I think that's going to happen here. I think that's the best analogy I can give to you. That's the one that comes most immediately to mind, is that there are going to be some things that will fundamentally change right now. And one of them is I think, is space. I think that's going to be an issue for a while. I've seen polls as recently as yesterday, done by Rasmussen, frankly, and they asked parents if they would be comfortable sending their kids back to school, even if school opened tomorrow or in the fall. And almost half of them said, no, I'm not comfortable with that right now. So, you know, that mindset is going to have to be literally altered, and I think it's got to start in the transportation department. You're not going to be able to do things in transportation that people are doing, you know, aren't doing elsewhere. You're not that special.
It's funny when you look at like even not that old of a show, and you go, wow, they're sitting next to each other, or they just shook hands. It just seems so dated now, almost, you know. But I also think about like a teacher who tries to be too cool with the students, and then you can never put that genie back in the bottle. It's better to be, I remember hearing, like, be really strict up front. You can kind of loosen as the school year goes on once you've earned that respect. Well, it's the same idea. Be hyper vigilant on social distancing. Maybe as the school year goes on, we start learning some more things on the ground. Maybe that can be loosened up a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it goes back to that notion of being flexible and adaptable and resilient, right? We just can't know, so you start with a cautionary approach and then you modify as you go.
Yeah, I mean, and Rick, I would say the final thing is, you know, I'd rather not have, you know, I'd rather not have anyone have to go out to the community and say, hey, you know, we made the decision to put all those kids in the school bus and now they're all sick. Yeah, sorry about that. I mean, that's not what Tim was talking about, you know, it's okay to be wrong. You know, I mean, that's not the right way to be wrong. Be conservative when you're going to make those decisions.
Sometimes.
Okay. The last thing, I would just be prepared to be right.
Right.
God forbid, again, right? We may be correct about all this. And if we do get it right, one of the things that we've got to think about is, when do we stop doing the things that are restrictive? Right? So you need to be prepared for both sides of the number line, ultimately, because some of this, we've talked a lot about failing. We're going to succeed a lot. So, like, let's make sure that we learn from the success as well.
Right. All right, well, let's go to just final takeaways. We'll just start with you, Tim. Go to Tom, Mike, and then I'll just close this out. Any what's the one thing that you want people leaving this webinar to take away with them? They can go back to their superintendent with, or their team with.
You will be the linchpin of normalcy.
Act, don't react.
People who are going to show up twice a day. So it's a huge responsibility. It's probably an unfair burden. That's what you're saddled with. So prepare yourself to be that linchpin.
Absolutely. And challenge your basic notion that your job is to react to what other people are telling you to do. Get out there and get out in front of your problems.
That's
and,
great.
and I would say realize that there is no one right answer. You know, what might be right for you might not be right for someone who's contiguous or next door to you. So, you know, don't, we will ultimately find best practices from within this, but right now we don't know what they are. So don't say that, well, just because she or he is doing that, that means I can do that too. There is no one right answer right now.
Yeah, we're building this plane midair, right?
Right.
All right, so Tony, do you have any, can you come on? I'd like to ask you, see if you have any final takeaways from this webinar as well.
Yes, guys, yes. It's one of the things I just heard Mike talk about, the shoes and all that going through the airport. You know, it's something that as a parent, we always, you know, kid comes home sick from school. Must have been some kid sick at school, right? And we've always accepted that. I mean, right? We always, well, the kids got sick. Then you talk to the teacher. Yeah, there's a bunch of kids were sick today. Well, maybe they should have never got there, right? And I'm thinking that too, right? How about at work? You know, you got people next to you. They're sneezing. You feel like, should we tell them, go home, you're sick? Well, then they're going to use up vacation. Like, I'd rather, you know, spend time at the beach, not home sick. Right now, think about that. You guys all had experience it. I think when a takeaway, people walk in the door and there's a fever. Sorry, you actually can't walk in the door anymore. And I think that's, you know, people are going to be okay. And I think, you know, talking about school buses, that's like the biggest PR element you have in the school. If that school bus is all nice and clean and it smells clean, guess what? Most likely that's how the classroom looks like. But unfortunately, if it looks dirty and it smells, you know, like a locker room, right? A gym locker room, well, then parents are going to be thinking, oh, I don't know if it's that clean. And I think these are all, it's perception. And we always said that that school bus is a walking PR element for schools, because I don't see my teachers all the time. I see school buses every single morning and afternoon. I think you guys know this. So I think those are my takeaway. There's going to be some things that we all always believe that, right? I mean, come on, right? I'm sure, Tim, you had someone sit next to you sneezing, coughing, and you're like, and you want to tell them, why don't you just go home? But then, you know, it's that awkward. But now you may not even walk in the door anymore because you're going to make everyone else sick. And somehow we all dealt with it, right? You guys have kids, you dealt with it. But I think that's a takeaway. Some of these things may be awkward, but also removes that. You know, we had to get sick because Jimmy didn't want to use up a personal day. That's ridiculous. And I think that's one thing I'm looking back. It's like, wow, that's what we had to do in the past. I think in the future, you know, I don't mind taking off my shoes at the airport because I want to feel safe. I don't mind, you know, having things. I hate when I lose things but guys, sorry for the long takeaway. I think some things will change, and I hope people see it. Some things are going to be a good change. Some, I want the old normal to come back, of course. So sorry to make such a long takeaway.
That's
but
good. No, that's good.
It's so good.
Adjusting our mindset. Everyone's mindset's listen, I went on a mission trip years ago, and they told us everybody has to be fat. You guys talked about flexible, resilient. Theirs was flexible, adaptable, and teachable. So can I be adaptable, you know, to the changes and teachable as well? So I just want to, first of all, just thank Tim and Tom. What a great presentation. The feedback, again, has been tremendous. For those of you who do have questions we didn't get to, we will be sending these to the panelists, and they will be also answering those, and we'll get those answers back to you. This will also be posted on our best practices page, as I mentioned earlier, at transfinder.com. Mike, I want to thank you so much for your leadership and for NAPT's leadership during this crisis, and really just before and after this. I mean, NAPT has been just a true leader. I want to thank all those who attended, and your questions have been phenomenal. I wanted to make sure we highlight that if you do have any stories about how you're serving your community, we don't care, you know, how big your district is, how small it is. You don't have to be a client of ours. We just are trying to get the best practices out there. Just email us at mystory@transfinder.com. so we can include those either on a best practices page or in a future webinar. And then finally, I just want to say, mark your calendars for next Tuesday, May 5th, also known as Cinco de Mayo, for our very next best practices webinar in partnership with NAPT, which I know is going to be phenomenal. We've already talked a little bit about planning of that one, and it's going to be great. So you don't want to miss it. For now, have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, Tim and Mike and Tom and Tony.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Guys.
Thank you, everybody.
See ya.
I've never seen your hair this long. I could tell you've never had a haircut. You always keep it so short.
It's awful. It really is.
How's it got that
Yeah,
So-
it's an Irish afro.
long? I know.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Antonio. Thanks, Rick.
Take care.